So there's a guy who collects whisk, those little things that you beat eggs with and stuff, and he has a whole room full of them. He's got one that's 6 foot tall, he's got one that's tiny, it's about the size of a quarter, he loves them. Has hundreds of them. And so he's out of Williams-Sonoma, and there is one of those pots and pan shows where if you sit through it for about 20, 30 minutes, then you get a free gift, and they've explained that the free gift is going to be a whisk. And so he's really, really excited, and he's watching this pots and pan show, and his wife has gone through the Williams-Sonoma. She hasn't seen anything she wants to buy, and so she comes up and says, "Hey, honey, let's go." And he says, "Well, I can't go right now. I'm watching this pots and pan show." She says, "We don't need any pots and pans. Why would you be watching that show?" He said, "Well, they're giving away a whisk." And you know me, I love whisk. And she said, "Another whisk?" She said, "No, you do not need another whisk. That is so, no, you have hundreds of them, so unnecessary." No. He said, "Well, I'm going to stay and get my whisk." So he did, watch the rest of the 10 minutes of the pots and pan show. And sure enough, at the end of it, they had in that little white box, little thin white box, that little cheap made whisk. And so he gets it, he's so excited about it. Well, when he opens it, it's real cheap, and he accidentally pulls one of the wires off, and it flips up and hits him in the eye. Well, he's walking out the store, and he trips over the curb into the parking lot. A truck comes by, hits him and kills him. And the moral of the story is don't take unnecessary whisk. That's the moral of the story. So I hope that you all will get the moral of that story. Now, sometimes emotions are really, really very helpful. And they cause us to make some very beneficial decisions. But sometimes when an argument, a discussion, and what I mean by that is a logical proposition, is moved out of the way and emotion is then put in its place, for you to get some kind of feeling without thinking through the situation. Let me paint you a picture. Suppose you see a man holding another man's heart in his hand. Blood is dripping down his hand, and he's holding somebody's heart. Is that man good or bad? Well, you don't know the whole story, but your immediate emotional reaction would be, okay, I've seen several movies where somebody cut somebody's heart out, like the old Temple of Doom movie where he stuck his hand in a guy's chest and pulls his heart out, and the Last Mohicans where the bad guy killed it. And I've seen some very emotionally charged situations where that would lead me to quickly think, if I just saw a picture of it, that this is a bad thing. You know, if you were living in a very remote tribe and you walked into a room where somebody took a knife and cut someone's chest open and literally pulled their chest apart and reached in and cut their heart out, you would think that person was killing the person on the table. Now, if we, from 21st century United States of America, were to look at that operating room and see a person in a mask with gloves on, and that person is doing a heart transplant, well, sure enough, yes, he has the person's heart in his hand, and that could be a picture, if you didn't understand what was going on, that would lead you to think something really, really bad is happening, but actually there's something really good happening there. And so what we see lots of times in the attacks against God and the Bible is an emotional charged attack where things will be thrown up at you and they will want you to think, yeah, that's terrible. Oh, I can't believe that would happen. Yeah, and it will be pictures that if you don't think through them, mental pictures, that if you don't think through them, well, it would be very similar to a person from a remote tribe watching someone do surgery. They don't know the rest of the story. And so you come to this idea of the atheist attacking the God of the Bible, and they constantly say that God is immoral. And we've looked at several things about what they have claimed, that God is immoral in certain areas, and we've discovered that that's not true at all. We looked at, they've said that God is sexist and values men over women. The God of the Bible, we've seen that absolutely every single way is absolutely false. We then looked at that idea of slavery, and they basically said, hey, everybody knows slavery is wrong. But then we looked at what the Bible really says about the idea of some situations where some people are forced to do things that they don't want to do, and equated them with things that we do and see that they are not immoral at all. And so we dealt with that. And now we're going to deal with, I think, probably the most often used attack against the God of the Bible. And so as we look at that, here's Richard Dawkins. He's recognized as the world's leading atheist, the most well-known, most prolific atheistic writer and speaker probably in the entire world. And here's what he says. He says, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Now, I'm going to stop right there and just say, I don't even like to read this. This is so blasphemous to me and so wrong and inaccurate and incorrect. It makes me bristle just to read it. But I think you need to see what people are saying about our God, the God of the Bible. And so here's what they say. He's petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent, bully. Okay. All right. Richard Dawkins, we see that you have no love for the God of the Bible. Well, which one of those would you say is the most pronounced, is the one that you believe to be the easiest to prove and to nail down? Well, Christopher Hitchens helps with that idea. Another one of the four horsemen, one of the four leading atheists. He has passed away now. He was at the time he was writing this. God is an evil monster whose actions and instructions in the Old Testament cause the ground to be forever soaked with the blood of the innocent. So you get down to it right there. And the real accusation in this particular instance that we'll be dealing with is that God kills or allows to be killed or allows to die innocent people. Now, mark it that they say often innocent people. Dan Marker, there's not enough space in anywhere to mention all of the places in the Bible where God committed, commanded, or condoned murder. So they're saying, hey, God kills people. Okay? Does God kill people? Does the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament kill people? Absolutely. On any number of occasions, you will read about God killing people. Ananias and Sapphira, who lied in Acts chapter 5 about the money that they had given to the church. The Bible says that God struck him dead immediately. Did God bring a flood in and kill every single person on the earth except for 8 people that were on the ark? Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives. Yes. So is it true that God kills people? Yes. Absolutely, positively, that is true. We're not arguing against that. We're not saying no, that's, some people have taken the wrong approach, absolutely, and said, well, that's figurative, that didn't really happen, that's something that's just trying to make a moral point, that wasn't really historic. No, that's not true. Just as sure as God made Adam and Eve in the garden, God also then killed the entire planet of people except for 8 of them. Now you let that sink in and you just ask the simple question, how can a loving, moral God do that? And it's a very good question. And I think what we'll see is, number one, where this is coming from doesn't have the ground to answer the question. And what I find so odd and so disturbing is that the atheistic community, at least those who have really thought through the godless proposition, that if there's no God, then there's really no ultimate foundation for ethics. We've looked at this slide every single time. They admit that, really, okay, there's no foundation for ethics in atheism. There's no way you can say this is always right for everyone, this is always wrong for everyone. But then in the next sentence they say, but we know what the God of the Bible did is wrong. Well, now, how is that? If, according to atheism, then there's no ultimate foundation for ethics, but then you point to these actions and you say, no, these actions are wrong, well, it's belying a truth that everybody recognizes. That yes, there really is some objective moral standard, and you're saying the God of the Bible violated that objective moral standard. He didn't, and we'll show that. But you're admitting that you think something wrong was done here. And so I find it so interesting that people who come to the Bible, they will sometimes read these kinds of things, and they'll say, well, I can't believe in loving God would do that, so I'm going to go and be an atheist. Okay, so you're going to leave a belief in a moral system and you're going to go to a system that says we don't really have any foundation for building ethics, but we're going to say that's wrong. On what foundation? Well, we just are going to say it, even though we admit we don't have a foundation for that. And so what I'd like to just suggest is, if a person really had a problem with the killing in the Old Testament, they'd never go to atheism then as a response to that. They would never say, oh, okay, I feel like something has been done wrong in the Bible, and so I'm going to go to atheism because it's a system that better explains somebody doing something wrong. No, it doesn't at all. And the people who are in the higher positions of the atheistic teachings and thinking absolutely admit that without any type of apology at all. We looked at this where Dan Barker said, hey, there are no actions in and of themselves that are always right and wrong. I can think of an exception in every case. Okay, well, if that's true, if atheism gives you that much leeway, can you think of a situation in which it would be right to kill all the people in the world except 8 people? Well, you said you could think of an exception in every case. And so, could you do that? Well, he basically, in the debate that we had, basically went so far as to say, we said, the person came up and said, could you rape a person? He said, yeah, you could. I said, what about 2 people? He said, yeah. What about 2,000? Yeah. What about 2 million? Yeah. So ultimately, if it would save humanity, and that was his main focus, if it would save humanity to kill everybody but 8 people, could you do that? According to your atheistic thinking. Well, he has to admit, yeah. If it would save all of humanity, because that's what he said to me. After, in that debate, he said, I would do that, I would do that horrible thing, and I would probably just hate myself for it, but I would do it to save all humanity, and you would thank me, he said. I said, no, I won't, because I know I've got a better place to go than this life. And he said, no, you don't know that, but his whole point was, you would thank me because I saved humanity. So, if in his mind, you could save humanity by killing everybody but 8 people, then according to his thinking, if there's no ultimate foundation for ethics and you can think of an exception in every case, would that be an exception? Well, it would. And so when these kinds of statements are made, you realize, well, hold on just a second. You don't reject the killing of people in the Bible because you have a moral standard and it's violating that moral standard. You reject it for something else. Why else do you reject it? And as you continue, Charles Darwin, we looked at this, a man who has no assured and ever-present belief in the existence of a personal God or future existence with retribution and reward can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow those impulses and instincts which are the strongest or which seem best to him. Darwin said, look, if you don't believe in God and you don't believe in heaven or hell, the only way I know you to proceed in this life is that you just do the stuff that feels the best, that you think is an impulse or instinct that's the strongest in your life. Well, do you understand that some people feel like the impulse that's the strongest in their life is to kill other people and take their stuff? Now, from an atheistic standpoint, you could say that's not going to be beneficial to society. We would want to have some police in the situation so that wouldn't happen to us. But the question then would not be, hey, not whether you want it to happen to you or not, is that morally wrong? And you couldn't say it's morally wrong from an atheistic standpoint, and they admit that you couldn't. They would just say, well, it's not beneficial. It's not helpful to who? Is it helpful to the person who has the instinct that he kills someone and takes that person's stuff and then feels great about what he's done? This is all very interesting to me when you assume everybody does good stuff. But everybody doesn't do good stuff. Right now, the human trafficking system in the world is massive. And the billions and billions of dollars that are spent on that. Well, those people who are trafficking other people are doing what seems best to them. And so where do you get the idea that you say, no, you can't do that to someone else? That's morally wrong. Well, from an atheistic standpoint, that just doesn't come from any type of top-down standard. Now, C.S. Lewis understood this very well. In fact, when he was a practicing, very active atheist, he said, my biggest problem with the world was that it seemed like it was unjust. He said, you would look at things that were going on Children would be getting beaten by their parents. People would be getting killed. People would be stealing from other people. And it was wrong. It was unjust. And I thought, how could a loving God allow all this injustice? And then he said one day, I thought to myself, well, where did the idea of injustice come from? If we are just products of evolution over multiplied millions of years and there's no God behind the scenes, then why do I think some things are right and some things are wrong? He said there was nothing I could build that idea of justice on, so I had two options. Number one, I could say, well, there's no real justice, I just don't like something. There's just a personal idea of mine. Or I could say, no, there really are some things that are unjust. But if I said there really are some things that are ultimately absolutely wrong, then that meant there was some kind of standard, and that meant there had to be something more than just this material physical world. There had to be a standard of justice somewhere. He said you don't call a line crooked unless you know what a straight one looks like. And subsequently, that atheistic idea was too simple because it couldn't give me a foundation for justice. Well, okay, you come to the Bible and you say, well, that's unjust, that's wrong. Says who? You see the problem that the atheistic proposition has. And, of course, we looked at Jeffrey Dahmer, who was a convicted serial killer, and they asked him there in the Stone Phillips interview, why did you think you could do this? And he said, well, because, as you read it, if a person doesn't think that there's a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought, anyway. Now, as you look at Nietzsche's statement, we believe that severity, violence, slavery, danger in the street and in the heart, secrecy, stoicism, tempter's art, and devilry of every kind, that everything wicked, terrible, tyrannical, predatory, and serpentine in man serves as well for the elevation of the human species as its opposite. Now, Nietzsche was very honest about the implications of atheism. And he said, okay, we have belabored under this false moral system of there being a God and that makes certain things right or wrong. He said, but if that's wrong, if there's no God, then when someone else kills someone, we've always said, well, that's a terrible thing. But what if it helps humans evolve to a higher level? What if the person that was just killed had a weaker genetic system or was less intelligent or was not going to benefit humans the way that the two people that just killed him were? Wouldn't that be a good thing? Now put good in quotations because he says there's no good and evil. It's just how you can get to a higher plane of evolution. And so, hey, if you're smarter than the guy next to you and you could use his resources better, if you killed him, historically we've said that's morally wrong because we've said people are made in the image of God. But if we get rid of the image of God, now you've got that guy's resources and you're smarter. Could it be now that the human evolutionary process will be better? Well, he says, yes, I think it could. And so you can't say anything's right or wrong. And he puts this in his statement that's from his book, Beyond Good and Evil. You know, basically says, hey, let's get past this idea that some stuff's good and some stuff's bad. Okay, you see the problem here. Okay, if there's not really anything morally wrong, then how can you look at the Bible and say, well, these people did something morally wrong? You see the challenge there. And as you look at it even further, here's what you start to realize. Number one, and this is a fact, much of the killing in the Old Testament was, and in the New, was the killing of people who had done things that deserved death. Now, there can be some argument as to whether or not you believe in the death penalty and you believe that a person should be killed for things that they have done. But what I would say is from the very beginning, if there is a God, and that God is the God of the Bible, which I would argue that that's the case, then God has always said from the beginning that there are certain things that a person would forfeit their life if they committed. And so you look there in Genesis chapter 9, where after the flood, God tells Noah, you can eat of all of the animals, but if you kill or do certain things to humans, then you would be liable for repaying that debt with your own life. And so what I'd like to suggest, number one, is lots of the things that you read there in the Old Testament and in the New have to do with people that were killed because they deserved it. Now, as you go through that, And you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Molech. Don't defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these things the nations are defiled, which I'm casting out before you. Here's what they literally did. The Canaanites literally would take their firstborn children, and they had a big statue where on that statue it was hollow, and they would fill it with combustible materials like coal or something of that nature, and they would heat it up so that it glowed orange, and then they would take their firstborn children and they would place their children on that altar and literally burn their children to death. And God says, okay, these people have committed crimes by which they have forfeited the right to live. And I'm sending the Israelites into this nation, and I want the Israelites to kill these people because they are vile, sinful, murderous people. So here's the question. Could a person ever do something that would be a legitimate crime for that person to deserve to be killed? Now, I would make the case that there is no possible way, morally speaking, you could say no to that. Now, some people do. Some people say, hey, the death penalty is never moral. That if a person killed 1,000 people in a brutal, horrible, serial killing manner, then that person still should never be killed. I just don't think there's any legitimacy to morally objecting to the death penalty when somebody deserves it. And I think what you'll see is that even the atheistic higher-ups admit, okay, we can't say that would be wrong. So keep going with me. And they built high places of Baal in the valley of the son of Hinnom to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire to Molech, which I did not command them, nor did it come into my mind that they should do this abomination. Now, here's what's interesting to me. Sam Harris, now he's talking about Islam, but he's one of the four horsemen of atheism. He's one of the most outspoken of the group. And here's what he says. Some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. Okay, now what he's thinking is, if you believe you can strap on a vest full of dynamite and walk into a marketplace and blow people up, you might not have ever done that yet. But if you're sitting in an interrogation room and a person says, would you if you had the chance? And you said, yeah, I'd do that if I had the chance. Then he says, it might be all right to kill a person if they just believed something that would be very detrimental or harmful to people. Notice, this may seem an extraordinary claim, but it merely enunciates an ordinary fact that the world in which we live, certain beliefs place their adherents beyond the reach of every peaceable means of persuasion, while inspiring them to commit acts of extraordinary violence against others. There is, in fact, no talking to some people. Okay, some people believe stuff, and you'll never talk them out of it. And if you let them go, they're going to do that stuff to other people. And he says, and I think it might even be moral to kill them just for thinking it. So, before we go further, is it true that one of the four most popular spokespeople for atheism says, yes, the death penalty would be legitimate for certain things? Now, I would go so far as to say, in this instance, he would go even further than I would say you could go. Where a person just said, yes, I would do that, just believing in something. But notice that he admits, okay, that would not be an immoral situation. Okay, so is much of the killing in the Old Testament and the New Testament a situation where you have people that were so callous in their minds and their lives that they weren't going to change, and God knew that. In fact, several hundred years before the situation, he said, okay, the time to go into Canaan has not yet come because their iniquity, their sin is not yet full. Now, I read that to say there are still some good things about the Canaanites. Now, there's going to be a time, several hundred years from now, when there's no fixing it. And I'm going to have to do something drastic. But at this time in history, there's still something good there. At least some. And so you see places like Lot going into Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot, who is a righteous person, is still there. But you see it gradually getting so bad that God then sends fire from heaven to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And you see God having to take drastic actions for people who, just like according to Sam Harris, there is in fact no talking to some people. You just can't talk them out of it. And they're violent, they're vile, they'll do terrible things, and it doesn't matter what you say to them, it doesn't matter how you try to reason with them, they're just going to be those kinds of people. And Harris admits, okay, yeah, I'm going to have to admit that it'd be all right to kill those people. Well, interesting, I think. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. And so I say that to say, you know what, that's not really even the discussion. I mean, Barker says, okay, all right. And this is a debate with Peter Payne talking about, in his debate it was, can you have morality without God? And Barker says, okay, maybe those men were guilty of committing crimes. And maybe some of them were justifiably guilty, Peter, of committing some kinds of crimes. He says, all right. I have to admit, maybe the people who are burning their kids to Molech deserve to die. Maybe. But what about the children? What about, he says, the fetuses? Does that strike you as odd? Discordant with what you know most people who are atheists think about human life that we've looked at? Now remember what we've said here. Are there people who call themselves Christians that don't act like Christians? Yes. The fact that a person holds to a certain belief does not mean they put into practice the moral implications of that belief. Are there many people who would say, I don't believe in God, but I think it's wrong to kill babies? I don't believe in God, but I don't think you could do things that the atheistic idea implies? Yes. And so when we deal with this discussion, we're not saying that every person who claims to be an atheist would do the things that I'm about to show you. We're saying that atheism logically implies these things. And if a person would not agree with them and would say, well, yeah, but I would distance myself from that. Okay, but that means you are disagreeing with the atheistic proposition. And so when a person says, I'm a Christian, but I think it's okay to steal stuff, well, then you're not really a Christian. Because if you're a follower of Christ, then that means you would listen to Christ's teachings, and that would be a logical implication that you would not do. So if a person says, I'm an atheist, but I still think human life has inherent value, well, then you're not really following the implications of the idea that there is no God. And so, Dan Barker, I think it's so interesting to me. He says, okay, what about the children? And then it's so interesting that he takes that next step and says, what about the fetuses? Now, what's he talking about when he says, what about the fetuses? You know, okay, the little babies. And when the children of Israel went into the land of Canaan, they were told to kill everybody. Everybody. Wipe out all the babies, wipe out all the moms, the dads, the cows, the sheep. They were told to kill everything. So he says, yeah, but what about the fetuses? The unborn children that the people of Israel killed. They did, and God killed many unborn children in the flood. What about them? Good question. Now, not to be too callous, but does Dan Barker care a thing about fetuses? He doesn't. And he's admitted so. In fact, what you see is that atheism has no problem killing unborn children. This is not an issue to the atheistic idea, because we've looked at earlier in our Fruits of Atheism lesson the fact that if there is no God that infuses inherent value into people, if people are not made in the image and the likeness of God, then they're just animals that can then be treated as such. And so as you follow this line of reasoning, that didn't come out well, I'll read it for you. Peter Singer, we talked about him and how he is recognized as the atheistic leading ethicist in the world. Here's what he says. If we compare severely defective human infants with non-humans, a dog or a pig, and we talked about this, how he says, we've kept the humans alive only because they're humans. He said, but species membership alone is not morally relevant. He said, we've always kept the humans alive because they're humans and we've killed a dog or a pig. But what if the dog or pig is better for society or smarter or more intelligent? Well, why do we keep the human alive? He said, if we can get rid of this idea that somehow just because they're humans, they're valuable, then we can look at human life as it is, and we can get rid of this sanctity of human life. Now, here's where we get to the rubber meeting the road with this idea. He says, okay, that a fetus is known to be disabled is widely accepted as ground for abortion. Now, that's where I stop and I say, no, I've never accepted that as grounds for abortion. I think that's absolutely morally wrong. That just because someone is not as intelligent or physically capable as other people does not give anyone the right to kill that person. But now notice what he then says. Yet in discussing abortion, we say that birth does not mark a morally significant dividing line. Okay, Peter, that's where we do agree. We say that birth doesn't mark a morally significant dividing line. What do we mean by that? Okay, if the child is valuable 2 days before he's born, he's valuable 2 days after he's born. If a child is valuable 2 months before she's born, she's valuable 2 months after she's born. We've always said birth makes no difference as to the value of the child. And so finally, you hear somebody that seems like he's agreeing with you. But we say that birth doesn't mark a morally dividing line. Okay, yes, great. We've always said that. But he's not going where you're going. Where you're going is if birth doesn't mark a morally dividing line and you can't kill a child a day after he's born, then you can't kill him a day before he is. If birth doesn't mark a morally dividing line and you can't kill the child a month before she's born, then you couldn't kill her a month after. That's where we would go. We would finally say, yes, we've always said birth's not a morally dividing line. And now he says that, so where's he going? I can't see how one could defend the view that fetuses can be replaced before birth, but newborns can't. You know, I just don't see, he says, how you could say you could kill a baby a month before it's born, but you then don't say you could kill it a month after it's born? So that doesn't make any sense to me. Why? Well, because birth doesn't mark a morally dividing line. Well, so what are you saying, Peter said? The leading atheistic ethicist in the world. If disabled newborn infants were not regarded as having a right to life until, say, a week or a month after birth, it would allow parents in consultation with their doctors to choose on the basis of far greater knowledge of the infant's condition than is possible before birth. You know, if you let them be born and then just watch them for a month, you would see how capable or incapable they were. And then after a month, if you just said, hey, babies don't have the right to life until after a month, and then you let them go for a month and they don't get as capable as you want them to, and then you kill them in consultation with their doctors, that'd be just fine because you would do it a month before that. Okay, now hold on just a second. I thought this was a discussion about how irate and morally appalled the atheistic community was against a God who would kill innocent children. That's not really the discussion. Because as you look at that atheistic idea, there's no grounds on which they can say it's wrong to kill a baby. In fact, they admit, hey, we think it's totally all right to abort children. And if you think it's totally all right to abort children before they're born, guess what? Birth doesn't mark a morally dividing line, and so you could just kill them after they're born. You see the problem here. Nevertheless, the main point's clear. Killing a disabled infant is not morally equivalent to killing a person. Very often, it's not wrong at all. Sam Harris, many of us consider human fetuses in the first trimester to be more or less like rabbits, having imputed to them a range of happiness and suffering that doesn't grant them full status in our moral community. He said, look, they're only this big when they're certain ages, about the size of rabbits. And so if you just don't call them people, then you can do whatever you want to them. Okay, so hold on just a second. So now what do we have? So now here's what we've got. It's a discussion not of, hey, your God is immoral because he kills innocent people. Because here's what we found out. Okay, they admit that some people might deserve to be killed. But then they say, yeah, but what about the innocent children or fetuses that don't deserve it? But then you say, okay, so are you saying it's never right to kill an innocent child or fetus or baby? And they're saying, no, we don't really say that. Actually, we would say, yeah, there are some instances in which we would decide that it would be okay. Now, if you just stop right here and say, okay, just a quick question. If there is an all-knowing God who knows everything that will happen, would he know better than you when to kill a person? Yeah. And so basically what's being said is we want to be the ones that make the decision to kill people, and we don't think that the God of the Bible has that prerogative or ability. Well, if there's a God who knows everything, then that God would be in the perfect position to know when a person it would be best for that person's physical life to end. So then you get in the next question, is that what we're in the middle of? You know, are we in the middle of, okay, atheists admit that it would be all right to kill babies, the Bible admits that the God of the Bible kills innocent children, and so really we just got a trump card in that God knows everything and the atheists don't. Is that what you got? Well, no. It's not what you're dealing with at all. In fact, think through the atheist proposition about killing an unborn child. If there's no God, there's no heaven, there's no hell, and you kill a person, if that were true, what did you just take from them? Everything. All that they will ever have. You see, according to the atheist proposition, the atheist idea that there's no God, there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's nothing supernatural, everything's material. When you exterminate a person's physical life, then that person's existence is over. So you look at this idea, since this is the only life we atheists have, each decision is crucial. We are accountable for our actions right now. Life is dear, it's fleeting, it's vibrant, it's vulnerable, it's heartbreaking, it can be lost, it will be lost. But we exist now, we are caring, intelligent animals, and we can treasure our brief lives. Okay, if that's true, if you believe that this life is all you got, and then you say, and we've got some unborn fetuses here that we think are basically like rabbits, if you kill them, what did you just take from them? Everything. So basically, the atheistic proposition says, hey, it would be okay to take everything from an innocent child. That's never been what God has said is going on with his taking the physical life of people. In fact, as you look at it, it's very, very different from a biblical standpoint. From a biblical standpoint, if there is a God, and that God infused an immortal soul into every single person, then when your physical life ends on this planet, what keeps going? Well, your immortal soul. And is it true that there are situations in which it would be better for your physical life to end and for your immortal soul to go somewhere where it is more peaceful and better for you? Well, yeah, that would be better. Matthew 16:26, what shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? You see, according to this idea, there's something very, very much more valuable than your physical life. And when your physical life is over, that's not all there is. There's something way beyond the physical life because you have an immortal soul. So as we look at this, is it better sometimes to lose your physical life and to be ushered into your ultimate spiritual location? Oh, absolutely. I think all of us understand that. Now, listen to Isaiah chapter 57, 1 and 2. The righteous perishes. Now, I think this verse right here deals exactly with what we are talking about right now. The righteous talking about now, he would be extending that to people who have sinned but have been forgiven by God, but it would also extend to people who have never sinned at all that are innocent. The innocent people die. Okay, people who don't deserve to die. They haven't done anything worthy of dying. The innocent people die. Well, what happens? And nobody really thinks through it. Merciful men are taken away while no one considers that the righteous is taken from evil. He shall enter into peace. They shall rest in their beds, each one walking in his own uprightness. He says, look, we see an innocent person die and we think that is so tragic. Why would God let that happen? How could that be the case? But God says, okay, I see you're thinking that for yourself, but what about the person that was a righteous person who just died? Where is she? Where is he? Oh, oh, they enter into peace. They rest in their beds, each one walking in their own uprightness. Is it better spiritually for that person to be dead? Absolutely. What does the Bible say was happening before the flood? Every thought of every person was only what? Evil continually. Who suffers the most when every thought of every person is only evil continually? The people who are the physically weakest. Can you imagine children living in a society where every thought of every adult was only evil continually? You know, there's one section in the Bible where it talks about a man selling a child for a bottle of alcohol or for a prostitute. You start thinking about the things that were happening before the flood, where every thought of every person was only evil continually. You start looking at Sodom and Gomorrah and seeing what the gangs of men were doing to visitors or trying to do to visitors to their town. And you start to realize that living in a place like that for an innocent child would be a recipe for mental, emotional, and physical perversion and twisting. Would it be better if there was a society where every person only thought evil continually? Would it be better spiritually for a 2-year-old not to be in that society? Okay, now, who is the giver of life? Physical life, the giver of physical life, God. Can God take back that physical life and in an innocent person's case exchange his physical life or her physical life for an eternal life of peace and joy and happiness? Well, yeah, absolutely, positively. In fact, as you're looking, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Well, hold on just a second. How, Lord, would it ever be precious to God for anybody to die? Well, if a person is righteous, if a person is going to heaven, if a person has a clean slate because they are innocent or because they have faithfully followed God after reaching the age of accountability, are they going to be with God? Oh, yes. So when an innocent child dies, according to the situation where there is a God and that innocent child has an immortal soul, is it better for the child? Yes. In fact, Paul understood this very, very well, where he said, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. For I'm hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Now, do you know that once this is brought out, that, okay, atheism says that this life is all there is, and the atheistic proposition would suggest that you could kill some people and take everything they've got. And you then say, well, hold on just a second. According to God, every person has an immortal soul, and he's swapping innocent children a physical life for an eternal, immortal place where they live in peace and joy. Is that fair to them? Well, Paul admits, hey, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. And then he gets to the bottom of that, and he says, for me to die is far better. So then, and in the discussions and writings that I've had with people who initially claim that God's immoral for what he's done, they then say, well, hold on a second. Okay, so if you're saying that's the case, why don't you just kill all the people so they can go to heaven? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, why don't you? I mean, right after a person becomes a Christian, they are newly baptized into Christ, and they have now taken on Christ. They're going to heaven. Wouldn't it be spiritually better for them just to be dead right when they come out of the water? Sure, probably. So why don't you just kill them all? There's a real simple answer to that. You don't have the prerogative to do that. Paul was in the middle of his discussion of how being dead would be far better, but does he have the right to kill himself because it would be far better for him? Let me ask you what happens if you take all the Christians and innocent children out of the world. Well, when Jesus came and he said, unless you become as innocent children, you shall in no way enter the kingdom of heaven, he was saying the leavening effect of Christians and children in this world are the things that show the love of God that bring other people to him. And if you get rid of that, did Job want to die and recognize that his death would have been far better than his continued life because of the pain and suffering he was going through? Yeah, but he didn't have the prerogative to take his own physical life. And so we get basically to the bottom line, and that bottom line is little children go to heaven when they die, and God has taken their physical life, but here's what we also know. Only God has the prerogative to decide when life on this physical planet is over, or should be over. Well, why is that? There's two reasons. Then Marcus says, morality is simply acting with the intention to minimize harm. He stated that the way to avoid making moral mistakes is to be as informed as possible about the likely consequences of our actions being considered. He said, okay, here's how you minimize harm. The moral thing to do is minimize harm. And the way that you minimize harm is that you think through everything that will happen and you try to make the decisions that make the least harm happen. Who would be in the very best position to minimize harm? A person who knows what? Everything. Would a person who knows everything know exactly when it would be time to retract a person's physical life? To maximize the spiritual effect of what's going on in the world? Yeah. In fact, according to the Marcus situation, if you had a person that knew everything, that person would be in a perfect position to minimize harm. Because he said, you need to be as informed as possible about the likely consequences of actions being considered. Well, if God knew everything, would he be as informed as possible about the likely consequences of all the things being considered? He'd know everything. So he would know the perfect time to maximize the beneficial effect. But there's a second aspect to this. And the second aspect is simply this. Then dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. There's two reasons why God has the prerogative to decide when a person needs to live or die. And that's number one, because he knows all the effects. And number two, number two is because he's the one that has given physical life. And it's a gift. It's not something we deserve. It's not something we've earned. It's not something we have the prerogative to keep. It is a gift that God can retract at any time. So I think it's so interesting that when all these emotional pictures are thrown up and God did this and God did that, and can you imagine a flood? Can you imagine this? And then you ask the question, okay, what did he really do to innocent children? He allowed their physical lives to end so that they could go into an eternal state of peace and joy and bliss, which Paul says is far better than physical life. So God's immoral for allowing an innocent child to come to paradise? And the atheistic proposition says, yeah, you could kill some people, sometimes maybe even for believing something, and sometimes you could kill unborn children because we really think they're like rabbits, and we'd be taking all there is from them. I think there is definitely an immoral situation going here, but it's certainly not the God of the Bible who is behaving in an immoral way. It's the person who doesn't recognize the value of the image of God in people. And it's the person who doesn't recognize the prerogative of God, who knows everything and wants the spiritual best for everyone, and his authority over the physical life that he gives. Well, sure appreciate you being here this morning. Thank you for being with us. Look forward to discussing more of these types of things with you in the worship hour.